So here we are. We're going to start with, I'd like to thank June Miller and Barry about setting up this part, with coordinating with the Historical Commission, the Program Committee, Elizabeth Ward, I saw, and Lucy Ayers. Is Lucy here? Yes. Lucy's back there. And myself, we're looking for additional volunteers for the Program Committee. And thanks to Evie Dewitt and the staff back there for helping us.
Click install.
So this was the Agricultural Branch Railroad. That was a typical locomotive. And this is the start of our little trip. So, all right, I'll turn it over.
So the idea at the moment was to imagine being on the railroad, starting at the southern end in Framingham and traveling north to the end, which turns out to be Fitchburg. The railroad went through a variety of different names. Agricultural Branch was its charter in something like, I think, 1845. Goes way back. Eventually it became known with a more common Massachusetts name called the Old Colony, which tended to be kind of out by the Cape on the South Shore and going up to the Cape, up to Provincetown and so on. Over time that railroad merged into the New Haven, both the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad, which is really how most of us might know it had we focused our attention here in Berlin. And eventually CSX, which you see on the big blue locomotive engines these days, has taken over virtually everything. Right? In this area we had a thing for a while called Pan Am, Guilford. Guilford bought the famous Pan Am airplane globe with the latitude lines and the paint, and he painted all his locomotives and cars bright blue with the Pan Am logo. And then lasted a few years, and now CSX has purchased that railroad as well. Okay, so everything in this area is going to be CSX. But here we are back in the old days on the Agricultural Branch Railroad. And so starting in Framingham Center, we would be down in what they call the South Framingham Railroad Station. That's a typical little depot of the era. Many of the images we have today are actually from postcards. It's kind of a wealthy source of information, particularly for things like railroad depots. Some of the best pictures come from postcards, and then the trick is finding one that hasn't been heavily written on or canceled. But they also help to date things very well. Many of these postcards were made right around the turn of the century, about 1908. You'll find many common dates. Right. So, having left South Framingham, we'd be on the Mass Pike in a future time. And if you go today on the Mass Pike and you're down by the famous Sheraton Tara exit with Route 9 nearby, if you look off traveling east, you'll see this lonely bridge on the reservoir. And I always wondered, what was the purpose of that? What was that still running? And so sure enough, there's the bridge today, complete with graffiti, with the big apartment complex that we all know on Route 9 traveling east. All right? And so that's the Ag Branch Railroad, well, remnant, if you will, of and something we can see today traveling on the Mass Pike. The next stop would be Southborough. If you've ever taken Route 30, there's kind of a complex of reservoir inlets and some bridges and so on, and sure enough, we can see Mass 30 on its way up, say, to Marlborough or going to the west. And so the railroad crossed over the reservoirs and continued north on its way up to Marlborough. So Dave has put in a couple of little gems here as to keep you sharp during the presentation. And the question is, where are you right now? Clinton, a smart audience.
Raise your hand.
Oh. All right, Rudy. There we go. Depot Square. All right.
I'm going to give the prize.
All right. Okay, we have a prize.
Prize too. There's a prize for every answer.
Oh.
When it says guess where, you
All right.
Raise your hand. And I'll give you you a prize. The prize is a autographed copy of one of the stations,
There you go.
which is a guess where station. So, stay tuned.
So the prizes are out of sync here, okay? We haven't arrived in Clinton yet. Okay.
So, yeah, they're all mixed up, so.
So the next stop would be Southborough on our trip. We're slightly going to the west at this point, and gentleman with the straw hat certainly dates that probably to about the 1910, 1920, something like that. Well dressed, waiting for the next train to come along. All right. Leaving Southborough, we come to an interesting place called the Marlborough Junction, and it's where it would split from going to the west, continuing its journey all the way up to Fitchburg, or continuing to downtown Marlborough. And Marlborough turned out it had two different stations from two different competing railroads. Okay. And so Marlborough Junction, there really wouldn't be much left today. We can see a modern factory building right beside where the junction would have been. The track continues, but the branch north is out of service. There hasn't been any trains up to Marlborough Main Street in many years.
It was referred to popularly as the Marlboro Y.
The Marlboro
You
Y,
can
how
see the
appropriate.
Y.
Yes. So there's a picture of it in the old days. The track going to the west is on the right side, the track going to Marlborough in the center. And we see what's called a train order board. It's that horizontal board with the square board hanging underneath it. And there things like train orders would be put there as a signal to the engineer that there might be something important for him to know. Maybe the track is out or he's got something special to do. Right? And interestingly, there's obviously some kind of a waiting platform for local people to come and wait for the train to go up to the city. So just a little bit of a greater image, you can see Marlborough, we're going up into the city, right to Main Street, as it turns out, where the New Haven Railroad had a station right downtown. And today, it's roughly where that parking lot is, in the center of town. There's a fish restaurant, there's a city hall nearby. It's on the south side of Main Street, or was, I should say, was, long gone. Right? And there it is, ladies in their finery, right there on Main Street. Trolley tracks in the middle, and the tracks would be basically behind the station, all right, coming up from the junction. And this was specifically for the New Haven Railroad. The Boston and Maine, the famous other railroad in this area, had their own station further down the street. So obviously as competitors, they didn't share the same facilities. That railroad is now the Hudson ARRT rail trail that goes through Hudson, comes up the hill behind Marlborough Hospital, and then would have come down into the city. Again, station long gone. There's a school, I believe, in its place at this point. Okay. And so here's the station on the left. We can see, pretty dated here. We have horses and buggies going as far down the street as you can see. Streetcars were very popular back in the day. There were streetcars right out on Route 62, right down at West Berlin Corners. The streetcar came there, it turned, and the power station was the Dagnalds Liquor building that we see today. That's where power was generated for the overhead wires. So all the way down the road, the overhead wires were what they call catenary, in which there was an arm coming up from the trolley to power it electrically. So continuing to the north via a western loop, okay, we've left Marlborough Junction, and now we're going to cross over what obviously would today become 495, and we're heading off toward Northborough. Another guess where? Oh, we got hands raised. Union Station, there, he's even naming it.
That's the original one.
Indeed,
No, that's the second one.
indeed.
That's the second Union Station, was it?
Not just refurbished, or was it truly rebuilt,
It's the same building rebuilt that's there now.
but refurbished, so to
But there
speak,
was
or?
a previous
Ah.
Union Station across the way.
I see, okay. I didn't realize that. It's so grand, you couldn't imagine it burning down or anything like that,
Oh, no.
which happened to so many.
This is the same one that's there, but this is there was an earlier one from the 1840s
Ah, okay.
nearby.
I don't know that we have seen a photograph of that, quite frankly. Okay. So, indeed, Worcester Station. So here's a quaint map of Northborough from back in the day, 1887 it says. And there's actually a little train coming from the southeast traveling up through town. All right. And today the track crosses right over Route 20 with some signals and then continues again on north. Not too many photographs of rail activity in Northborough. We went down and visited the Historical Society. This was about the best we came up with, frankly. I guess not a lot of photographers back in those days. There were several different other stations. I think there's one called Hospital from the state hospital at one point, but nothing of note. So that's about the best we have. We did see some slides of what's called railfan trip. So sometimes there's organizations that can get together some passenger cars. They're usually self-propelled, and a lot of people call them bud cars. And so there was a fan trip going through Northborough at one point. The quality of the photograph, though, was difficult for us to bring home. And so I don't have an example of it here, I don't believe. But that was probably the last passenger train to ever go through Northborough. And the same is true pretty much here in Berlin. There was a trip in 1975 of those silver powered bud cars that made an excursion out here. It was the last time that the passenger service was ever used on the Central Mass here. Okay. So continuing north, we're starting to get into home country here. We can see Crosby Road, South Street coming up through the south part of Berlin. All right. And we're eventually going to the west side of town. All right. There was a small station near Jones Road. Initially, I was somewhat confused and thought maybe it was called South Berlin Station. It doesn't seem to have that name. It's just known as Berlin Station. All right. And it's roughly in the Jones Road area. Barry, did you have any personal knowledge of seeing that station at all back in the day?
It was gone before my time.
Even
They stopped passenger trains in, what, 1933 or something like that?
Something like that, right?
And it was gone, though I was always told about it being there.
Ah, okay.
And of course, South Street from Linden Street to that location was known for quite a while as the Depot Road.
I see. Thank you.
And it didn't continue, right, at that point, it's south there, right?
For a short time, yes. But the town built Jones Road across to Pleasant Street and the South Street to South Berlin within months of the time that station opened.
Okay.
And so both of those streets were added in order to service the railroad.
There's a wonderful website called Nashua City Station that has many photographs of it. We have a few that don't have their name plastered in front. But it's a good example. And we see the same special message board coming off the roof on that horizontal board with another information board hanging down as an indicator that the engineer should observe maybe some special orders for the trip going north. You can see a little freight door on the side. Some stations had a little freight office built in. Some of them had a special freight office separately, oftentimes just down the track a little bit. So pretty typically, you'd have the milk business was quite a driver of railroad business. This is obviously a pretty local delivery here. It's looks like a pretty common baggage car, but many of the milk cars were special in that they often would say things like glass lined, they'd be refrigerated. Refrigerated cars obviously come later once there's motors and the technology to have refrigeration. Clearly things like the ice business was important to keep the milk cold, getting into some of the big cities. Okay. So this slide is, we picked up a number of random slides. Again, very difficult sometimes to find pictures of the trains on the actual agricultural railroad. You want to go ahead? Let's do it. All right, the local expert.
Local expert.
Local expert.
So this was something I was really interested in. This next slide is a schedule of passengers to travel on this railroad. And notice it starts at the top at Fitchburg, leaves at 5:35, and then in South Fitchburg, West Leominster, Clinton at 6:04, and a few minutes later, 6:18. So it took from 18 is 14. So it took 14 minutes to get from Clinton to Berlin. And you would get the morning train if you were working in Boston. Not too many people worked in Boston at that time, but you could also commute to Northborough where the button factory was, and you could work at the button factory because there were similar trains in the afternoon coming back at about the same schedule. So you had a way of getting from no one had a car, some people had a horse. You could have saddled up the horse and done that, but the trains became the communication link between the towns. It was so essential to have that shared, emphasis on working together. And it went all the way to Marlborough Junction. Framingham Center was 7:03. And then you would change trains in Framingham, and down below you can see Framingham to Boston. There was a 7-minute layover, and then you would leave Framingham and you'd be in Boston. After leaving at a little after 6, you'd be in Boston at about 7:53 or 8 o'clock.
What year was that, Dave?
That was sometime between the 1860s to 1890s.
Yeah,
Maybe even later than that. Probably ran until 1930.
exactly. Yep.
But then we had the automobile, we had trucks, so the railroads sort of were in the passing. Anyway, I might do one more. We can have a discussion later on. The next city is West Berlin. I'll do it till we get to the next quiz. So this is the West Berlin station. As you can see, the water tower for steam locomotives there on the right-hand side. And sometimes there were cisterns located above the railroad somewhere in the mountain nearby. They were cisterns for a spring. And then there was a wooden pipe or something that would come down and bring the water to the tank by gravity. And then there was you could see that arm that would feed the steam locomotive. That tank is actually an elevated tank. No pumps involved.
That's dated 1899. The station is still called West Berlin at that point.
Yeah. And this is a popular, one of our popular slides. It's the central mass is going on that trestle across the river, and we're looking now west on Route 62 to the Five Corners. And on the left-hand side of the road, you can see a sawmill, because there was a mill on the upstream side of the road, a dam, and that water ran through and powered the saws in that sawmill. And the trains, especially the agricultural railroad, was at grade level here, and they could load, take by wagon, load the lumber, unload the logs, and then load the lumber. So it was very a great location. It would be like 490 and 290, 495 and 290, with those connection of transportation systems. So West Berlin was kind of a hub for that. this is about 1910.
Guess where?
Bolton Station.
No?
Berlin.
Carterville?
Berlin.
Carterville?
West Berlin.
West Berlin.
Carter Street.
I'm gonna give it to the gentleman here. So it's really called Carter Station.
Oh, where did you take that?
No.
I don't want to take some to something.
No, let's hear this.
It's the same building, but it was renamed to Carter's.
Carter's.
And I understand it was the confusion possibly of the little Jones Road station versus this as to whether it was the primary growing station or not.
Yeah.
So supposedly it was a confusion solution.
Yeah. So that's called Carter Station, and it's about where the existing real estate office is. It's up
On the other side though.
on the other side of the road, before you get to Lincoln Street.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, up on at the extreme right edge there is the front of the West Berlin store, Silas Harder's store in West Berlin, which is now 220 West Street that has apartments in it. And the station was kind of across the street from that. And the buildings on the left side, one of them, the more distant one, is what's now the real estate office and so forth.
And with that, I think.
And don't be confused about Carterville and Carter's. Carter's was West Berlin on the agricultural branch railroad. The Berlin station on the Mass Central Railroad was in what we know as Carterville, just up the street here.
This is an interesting little map. I called it Plate 36. It was a series of map plates that were available made around, I guess, 1905, if I'm not mistaken.
1898.
1898? Thank you.
That's the 1898 caveat.
Ah, all right. And so one of the curiosities is a track that's going to the northwest across that pond. And apparently there was an attempt to link up the Boston and Maine Central Mass, east and west, with the New Haven. But the story is pretty vague. It's hard to understand why they did it. I haven't heard any good explanation as to whether there was a test to see if they could bypass the reservoir to go there. It's two different railroads, so they're competing with each other. Yes, sir.
Well, the bed to that railroad is still there. You, down where it takes off from the main line and goes up, the fill is there, or where they must have planned it, they must have got into it before they stopped.
I agree.
If you go up in the woods, you look for it, you can see it.
I was curious as to where it would come out in today's terms. By that blue industrial building today, or a little further beyond that near Randall Road? I don't know.
No, the railroad, the street going off to the left of the school is Lincoln Road. So
Okay.
it would have come out to the railroad
Right
right
about-
about opposite that.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that I've heard about it is that it was something they did as part of the reservoir project in order to bypass the reservoir until they got the new tunnel built and so forth. for the
I see.
railroad.
Okay.
Maybe that's right. I don't know. But it is on the 1898 map as being there.
Yeah. And I guess maybe that new development, is it called Pollard Road, that
Yeah.
at the very last? It looks as if they may have obliterated
Yeah.
some of that right away. All right. Let's have them do that. So a friend of mine, fascinated by the whole thing, he's done a little bit of field work. You can see the development hasn't been put in yet, the Pollard Road, and it looks as if it takes off well before the five corners to give enough room to make a decent turn on the track to, again, come down roughly, as you say, where Lincoln Street is. It's not well documented. There's a Boston and Maine book that refers to it very obliquely. Lucy?
It actually
that turn, because I used to walk it a lot when I was a kid.
Yeah.
At railroad bed, Mass Central Road this way, and it would be almost just right behind my house.
Was it a clear enough path?
Oh, yeah. And it
Open
kind of
enough?
circled around, but it kind of headed toward Randall Road.
Okay, okay. Well, we just don't know much about it. It might have been a logical way to avoid a tunnel in Clinton and that rickety viaduct in front of the dam. But everything I've read, there was no serious consideration of it, as you say.
It was
eventually.
temporary, I think it was the temporary use thing.
Yeah. There's quite a grade change too, and going from the upper level of the Central Mass down to the New Haven. You can also see how in red, the old east-west Central Mass took the turn up to the northwest once the reservoir was filled, and they couldn't continue, obviously, to the west. This is another little curiosity. Again, Barry, I'd refer to you. Is that possibly a little trolley stop? It's south of the railroad, the bridge.
It's the crossing guard's shanty.
Okay, just a little,
It's a little place for the
Okay.
crossing guard to stay, and he would come out and manage traffic when the trains were coming through.
I ask because there's a well-dressed man, looks as if he's waiting for the train somehow.
I don't think that was ever the station.
Okay, all right.
And it also, and of course, we also had trolley cars going through.
Yes,
So there was a certain amount of need for some traffic management.
okay, okay. I had thought possibly the original Carter station had been moved or burned or something like that. This is just a little bit of a mystery. But yeah, many road crossings had what they called a crossing tender, essentially a man who would sit in a little house all day, waiting for the next train to come and have to physically run out, pull the gate down, and let the train come through. One of the great lost occupations.
Just beyond is the coal, that's a coal shed.
In the diagonal building.
That's a coal shed for the railroad.
How would they have gotten the coal into the tender? Just muscles, or was there some kind of a lift to get it up into the...
I don't know, I imagine that they had cars that they could dump it from, but I
Somehow.
don't know how they did it.
Okay.
Hey, on the right there, you can see a little angle thing.
Like
That's just a lift.
like a crane.
Yeah, on the,
Certainly looks like it.
yeah, that's, yeah,
Yeah?
it's just like, just you fill it back up, pickup truck, fill it down.
How about the tall building above the coal shed? Any pictures on that one? Looks like a church.
Water tower.
It's not that.
Yeah. It's puzzling, isn't it? Like say it has a window in it or something. It's funny the things you see in these old
I've
photographs.
not seen that one before.
Yeah. So, continuing north from West Berlin, we're going to be approaching Clinton and then again continuing up the way. So we tend to have a little tiny stop in Bolton. I think it's the cutest picture. That house on the right is still there, very much the same as it was back in this photo. There's nothing left at this point. So today, the road going off to the right is Wattaquatic Hill Road in Bolton. Chase Street and Water Street are off to the left. The tracks are still the same, and that's the road that goes down to the big development. Richfield?
Lancaster Road in Clinton.
Yes, Richfield Development, yep. So again, we see that interesting signboard coming off the top of the roof for the engineer. And I imagine that somebody at the station had to also serve as that crossing tender to pull the gate down for the traffic. Must have been a popular hangout for the local kids. Okay. So same story. These little milk cars, again, later on would be refrigerated. Later on, in some cases, they would actually be like a tank, type of special tank car for the local milk coming in from the farms. Again, pretty dated photograph there. The milk jars are awfully small. Most of us are used to the big seal milk cans. And the horse, you bet. The only way to travel. So here's our modern look at where that little station would have been. Long gone, somewhere buried down under the asphalt. But it's funny that the house is virtually unchanged. So we've arrived in Clinton. It's what I guess they would have called a Union Station, being two different railroads joining at a common point. Right. Still very much there, closed for the most part, unfortunately, with a number of businesses occupying the interior of the building at this point. The upper level, I think, is closed from the inside. And Dave, you've taken a trip there. Some beautiful woodwork still inside the station, but no way to get up to the top.
It's a consignment shop in the station, and it's a high-end consignment shop. It's really well done. And there's a door, mahogany door that says baggage on it. It would lead into so you can drop your bags off. And then a really beautiful staircase that goes up to the second story where the train hall was. And that's still intact. And if you're shopping in the store, you can see that.
I doubt anyone's old enough here to remember being a passenger at the station. I think you'd have to go back pretty far, unfortunately, for that.
Right. On the opposite corner, there's a brick building. If you look at the facade, there's two old cow heads chiseled into it.
Really?
And that was started by a gentleman who then moved his business to Iowa
Okay.
because he started shipping whole carcasses. His name was Mr. Arnold.
The Armor?
The Arnold.
The guy? From Clinton? Do
That's
we
where he
think?
started his business.
Wow,
He
that's an
couldn't
empire.
make it worthwhile, so he moved up to Iowa.
The Armor meat business. That's a story. Wow. Here's a modern shot. Again, the common blue and yellow CSX locomotives that we see all the time around here. Station looking kind of sad these days. And so I believe that's a south-looking shot into the brush that you see down below Main Street where the old mills are at this point. And again, there would have been a lot of tracks in the old days, probably 3 and 4 wide. That was quite the business. What do you think? Passenger cars?
Raise your hand. Anyone?
What's the question?
Where is it?
Well, clearly that's Clinton.
Oh, no, that's right,
Just raise your hand.
Woodlock, really street Woodlock.
No. It's the New Haven Bridge over the Boston Main.
There you go.
And
It's Clinton. That's Clinton, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And you can see the two tracks, and our track is the one where the cars are on.
there was 3 tracks across the bridge.
Yeah.
I meant there were two train systems.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Okay. Right. So that's the New Haven on top. Again, the railroad that we've been talking about today. The Boston and Maine down below would have gone up north to Ayr and south down to Worcester eventually. Okay.
For which years is made?
That's an interesting question. Those are what they call the bud cars, known as RDCs, self-propelled bud cars. Very popular with what we call rail fan trips. So even today, they still have some of these bud cars running. They've been restored and they have fan trips. There was one recently that went out, I think, from Bennington into New York State. Right? So you could take that for about $120 just to experience being on a section of track that probably hadn't seen a passenger service in 100 years. So every once in a while they do get permission to run on these freight railroads to have a trip. And there's a local outfit called the Mass Bay RRE, the Rail Friends Organization. Wonderful organization that puts on these trips. And so again, they did one right up here to Highland Street back in 1975, and that was the last time there was any passenger service on the Central Mass. They've run some to the old Watertown line. It's all now a bike trail. So again, a lot of these trips are quite dated. Okay? You know, this looks to me probably like something like 1965. if I had to guess?
I would go earlier.
Even earlier?
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say that's like, there was some trips by the National Valley Railroad Association,
Okay,
and they were like 1952 or something like that.
all right.
And I don't know if it's the same picture, but the boxcar that's on the right side of the picture, you can see the edge of it.
Yes,
It could be a Maid Central boxcar, because I've seen pictures of, that were taken like that. But I only seem to remember one car in the picture, not three.
okay.
But there, as you said, there were other rail fan trips on that line. But I know for a fact that the National Valley had a rail fan trip.
Makes sense. You point out a really excellent other point in the picture, and that is that we see in the very corner a curved track going downhill.
Right.
So again, one of these curious things of the New Haven Railroad building a connection down to the Boston and Maine. You know, for what purpose?
There were 3 tracks,
Okay,
and one was the interchange track,
all right,
and there was like 2-yard tracks, and then there was sidings off the interchange to the mills on Main Street. And there was a coal, there was the coal, the Ruane coal.
Ruanes, yes,
Coal thing was there.
right.
And there was also a feed store with the auto parts store.
Oh, all right. Yep.
That's the Swift building.
Swift?
Yeah, Swift Premium.
Is that the building we see in the
Yeah,
distance?
Yeah.
Right, it wasn't
That
on
used to
the
be-
Swift.
That used to be all street level.
Okay.
All of that stuff was built by man-made.
I see.
Raised that.
Okay,
It was approximately 1910 that there was a grade separation.
they did that, okay.
And many, many streets in Clinton got rearranged from that. But you can tell because if you look at the abutments, they're poured concrete, where all the other abutments around there were, you know, the big rock.
I see, the granite blocks, okay.
And poured concrete abutments were like early 1900s.
Interesting, thank you. I always thought that was curious. This is one of the very few photographs I've seen where you clearly can see that track running down by the Ruane Coal Company and the mills.
And look how nice the track looks too.
I know. So much has been lost. Yep. Yeah, so these special self-propelled cars came out in 1952 by what they call the Bud Company. They made a famous train called the Flying Yankee, this beautiful streamliner that if you ever were down at Edaville Railroad was on display, just as a static display of the train. And the Flying Yankee was one of the great streamliners of the 1930s, made by Bud, in this brand new concept called the stainless steel with the extruded. And so that ran for many, many years up to Portland. After about 1 million miles of service, I think Edaville got it for $1 just to be put on display. But sadly, it was vandalized. No one ever took care of it. No one ever thought the train would run again. And so it was in really rough shape. And when Edaville went bankrupt in 1994, an enterprising man from New Hampshire with one of those sort of Santa Land businesses bought it, and it was trucked up there. And sadly, that streamliner, the intent was to actually rebuild it, refurbish to running condition so that they could run it up North Conway on the railroad up there. But it was just a project, I think, beyond the scope of their ability to pay for it. And so it sits right now at something called the Hobo Railroad. And apparently the new Hampshire government might get involved to try to revive that whole concept. So very famous cars. Again, they had their life. I remember them on the MBTA in about 1988 when I first came here, and they were all replaced, of course, by the new equipment, the silver and purple MBTA cars.
And on that last picture, could
Yeah.
you see any logos on the Bud cars?
Well, it looks like it says New Haven on it to me.
Yeah, it say New Haven on the letterboard, but on
Yeah.
the ends, is there any?
No.
Like a script style?
Usually there's a signboard when they take these railfan trips. There'll be a white board and it'll say railfans of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, something like that. And I agree with you, I don't see anything like that.
It doesn't have to be enough.
Yeah. It's curious, isn't it? So continuing beyond Clinton, we end up going to Pratt's Junction. up beyond Route 12. If you have a keen eye, as you travel, say, from downtown Sterling up toward 190, you'll see quite a long, extensive, flat area in the woods. And lo and behold, that was the Sterling branch, long gone, runs right by the Sterling Police Station on Route 12. So that's a long lost part of the Agricultural Branch Railroad. So this was an old photograph of what Pratt's Junction looked like. Again, the water tower for the tenders, for the steam locomotives. Just a modern view of the plywood trains that come through at Pratt's on 12. Okay. And then that branch went down south through Sterling to what's called the Junction, which is on Route 12, down south of town. And there's a campground road some of you might be familiar with. If you're down at Rhoda Ice Cream, you'll see Campground Road down that way. And so it goes down to that point. We kind of lose, once it comes to the junction, that's the end of the Agricultural Branch Railroad. This was the station there at the end of the line on that sub-branch. Okay. Nice double header. 2 locomotives back to back. Okay. And so we would continue north from Pratt's to go up to Leominster. And so there's the Leominster station. It's still there. My great surprise is that they have built a rail trail along Route 12 in Leominster. I never thought I'd live to see that, but they've done quite the job. They've actually replaced the bridge over Route 2. It's quite amazing that the money was there to do that. Again, I'm amazed. The building is still very much
I
there.
think the building in the bank burned and they rebuilt it. It's a brick building which hosts now a bank. Also, Leominster did also a historical job to rebuild the semi-structure of the back building.
The one I'm thinking of is across Route 2. Just as you get off Route 2 west, going to Route 12, BJ's, the old motor vehicle and so on, there was a railroad bridge. And I would have thought they would have just refurbished that for a rail trail. They rebuilt the whole thing from scratch. It's amazing. Yep. So again, here's one of those quaint tinted postcards. We're looking south at the station. And again, you can see everything in those days was at least double tracked. We've lost a lot there. Now we're paying to put tracks back again, especially on the MBTA line that came out of South Acton. And finally we get to Fitchburg. And again, we see the famous little train order board sticking out. That was a pretty modest station compared to what they had for the Boston and Maine. That was a very grand station by the Boston and Maine Railroad. This was pretty modest by those standards, and remarkably quaint if you look at the structure. They spent time in those days architecturally making the stations look nice.
Where was it located? Is this Route 12?
The question, it's a good question because I haven't been able to locate specifically where that was. Now, probably looking on an old topographical map from that time, we might get a sense of something that would indicate a depot, but I have not found it.
Maybe Clayborn.
Clayborn?
Yeah.
That area?
Oh, just a guess.
Okay.
If you look at the county outlook map.
Okay. Or Sanborn map, possibly? Sanborn insurance map sometimes? Okay. So that's the Grand Fitchburg station of the Boston and Maine. So our trip has ended. We're back up to the main line now coming out of Boston, which again today would be CSX. It was Pan Am. It was Guilford Rail. It was the Boston and Maine on the main line, again going out to the Hoosick Tunnel or into Boston.
So this is again, you've seen this slide. This is the CSX on the Agricultural Railroad heading north at the Clinton Railroad Station. And they, So Ed, I put the logo up there. I was involved with reviewing the purchase of the Pan Am Railroad by CSX, and there was some question about monopolies and trust, whether there would still be competition in New England after CSX bought this railroad. And the Federal Railroad Administration had hearings, and they had heard cases on both sides, whether to sell it and allow the purchase or not. And in the end, CSX won because of their connections. And unfortunately, I can't put up the map.
Let me try.
Okay, while I'm talking, I still have,
Okay.
maybe go to one more slide.
All right.
Yes.
Sure.
So CSX, that's a typical CSX railroad. We could have more business on this line in the future. And you probably have seen, you can go ahead and.
All right. Sure.
So we've got a map, we'll see if we can get it up and put it up here, of the CSX rail system from east of the Mississippi. Everything east of the Mississippi is sort of a CSX map, and you can hone in on it. You can click anywhere on the eastern half of the country, and it will drill into the area that you're interested in. From almost south of Miami, heading out to Key West, from there all the way north to Maine and into Canada, and from Cape Cod all the way to the Mississippi River. And so that's what this railroad is part of. And it's owned by the same company, and some of the trains you hear at night going through Berlin could end up, some of those cars could end up, they put them together, it could end up anywhere on the eastern half of the United States. So it's quite a railroad, and we're part of it now. And there could be some changes in manufacturing, wind turbines. With a railroad, you know, we're not limited to just trucks. So with that, are we all set? Okay, so I'm gonna, that's the eastern half, this is just New England actually. I'm drilling into a local, you can start to see Berlin is in here. And here's Jones Road and so forth. So I guess I'll leave it on this one. But you can see that same map that Ed had up there. You can see leaving Framingham down near the reservoir, up to Marlboro, west to Northborough, and then north through Berlin, Bolton, and up to Clinton, and then beyond. So this is, I just zoomed in from the eastern half of the United States. So that's where we are now. We're kind of connected in some way. And recently, we've seen a paper in the Wall Street Journal about a train to Marlboro from Framingham. And the tracks are being improved. They need some signalization for passenger trains. They're a little more safety conscious. But it's possible that we'll see a train to Marlboro in a near future, and then perhaps to Berlin and Clinton. Yeah.
What's the agricultural branch used for now? It looks like mostly scrap metal coming up there, scrap back and forth.
So the question up front here is, what's the railroad being used for now? And a lot of it is raw materials for Leominster and Clinton, a lot of oil, a lot of automobiles will be coming on it, I think.
Hopefully not final.
Does it go all the way Pittsburgh now, or does it stop in Leominster?
It stops in Leominster.
Because the line's not there anymore, right?
Yes, it ends in Leominster right now. So. But lumber, bulk materials, trash. Could be trash. Most of the trash gets burned in our resource. And
Chemicals for the plastic industry in Leominster.
Leominster is really,
That's a lot.
there's a lot of raw materials that go to make plastic, and then the products are shipped out nationwide.
And the scrap metal from Reisner's and Clinton goes south.
Maybe they shouldn't have ripped up the tracks to
That should be
Pittsburgh.
double tracked. Yeah. Well,
Well, I mean, even a single track.
yeah, it would have been good to keep that, but it's a rail trail.
Right.
So, yes. We're gonna open it up for discussion, so if you have a question, raise your hand. Yeah,
Two things. One, on the train where you see somebody in decent clothing standing at the station waiting to get on it. Those trains were a combination of freight and passenger and mail.
Yes.
Yeah.
1959.
And what would the appointments in the passenger cars so that people would be riding it?
I think they would be pretty primitive cars. I don't think there were sleepers or anything like that, so they were comfortable cars, and they
I mean, upholstered seats or wooden?
Upholstered.
upholstered seats.
Yeah.
No air conditioning.
Right, that's the key.
Yeah.
When you had that schedule of the trains coming down through
Yeah.
Berlin, my father lived on South Street, farm where the school is now. That was my grandfather's farm. My father went to Worcester Boys Trade School. And he got that train at Jones Road. But he had to milk 3 cows first and run down, and you could tell how fast he had to run by the whistle on the train.
Oh, yeah.
Is he at West Berlin? Is he at Linden Street? Where, how much longer before I gotta get on that train?
Yeah.
And then he got the electric car in Northborough and went to Worcester. So the electric cars
Yeah.
running to the same time as the trains running.
Yeah, we saw some of those photographs of the trolley where they had to get off one trolley because they couldn't cross the railroad. And the
Oh.
passengers would get off one
Yeah,
trolley and
yeah.
walk across the railroad and then get on the trolley to go to Worcester.
Yeah, yeah.
So there was, that's, those are the kind of things that were happening just in this area. And, go ahead.
Yeah, it looked like from the Berlin station photo, it had more than one track, is that true?
Oh, yeah.
Was there, so, I mean, you can even tell today that there are 2 tracks there.
Yeah.
It was a single through track, but there was a siding, so they could put freight cars off there.
Oh, okay.
And, I mean, even in fairly late years, Coldwell's used to have freight cars come in on that railroad and on that siding, and also up in Carterville, from the Mass Central.
Okay.
If you look up the street, Mary Porter lives in that yellow house where the right-of-way is.
That's the
And in
central.
the woods there, there's a lot beside her house. There must be at least 3 different tracks.
Oh, yeah, I saw that, I walked through
Sidings.
last
But the
year.
main line was only a single track going
Yeah.
back to Lebanon.
You got a comment
I
or a question?
remember Colwell's men, Barry talked about unloading everything by hand, there's no fork truck, it was box cars. Every board came out, they go to run the truck and they haul it up down here.
Yeah.
And that was that. Just another little thing that when you talk about West Berlin, there was a cistern, there's a cistern that's still there, up halfway up Barnesville Road. Off the left in the woods a couple 100 yards, nice little reservoir, and an iron, 3-inch iron pipe came running down, and it used to come out of the, must have come all the way down underground, because I remember it coming out of the ground just as you start up Barnes Hill on the right. And it dumped into a big cast iron pot.
Cistern, pot,
And-
yeah.
And it used to run out of the pot and then run down the road, but I've heard that was originally to charge the water tower for the train, which makes sense because they have that extravagant a water system, the water the horses just didn't make sense. So it's probably that was originally
Yeah.
to charge the train.
Lucy, do you want to say something about that, or?
Yeah, that
You
was,
talk about that.
that was I used to own a little piece of that property at one point, up between Barnes Hill and Derby Road, and that cistern was there, and my dad would say that that was what they would fill the steam engines with.
Yeah.
And he said that there were wooden pipes that ran down through there.
Yeah, gravity fed, no pumps. They were all gravity fed down to the.
And the other thing that we used to do there is when we got off the bus at the bottom of Barnes Hill, we would stop there and drink water from there. And in the summertime, I know. I
It
couldn't
was
work
spring
out
water.
from.
It was spring
It was
water.
spring water. And in the summertime, when our spring well ran dry, we would go down there and get some water
Oh,
in
okay.
jugs.
All right, this is a good discussion. Anybody else? You want to stand up?
They've been doing some work on the rail lines for good reason, because they were in pretty ratty shape. Did I hear that there was some notion that they might enhance that condition of that line to the point where they could actually run the trains at 20 or 25 miles an hour?
Well, that's what's idea of coming to Marlboro from Framingham. I think CSX is, they're a good railroad company, and they can't stand derailments or, so they're going to improve the tracks. And with that comes the opportunity for passenger rail. So
Actually, last summer when they were working there, they changed the rail, it was from 70-pound rail to 110-pound rail, okay?
that's per foot.
Well, they had a 7-inch rail, now they have a 9.5-inch rail, okay? It's 2 inches wider, so it can handle a much heavier weight. And they intend to run freight trains up this line, up to the lines they can bypass Boston to get freight up to Maine, up to Canada. If it's from New York, and rather go out west to go north, which is what they have to do now.
Yeah.
What's an optimum speed for a freight line?
So with this new rail, right now they're restricted to 7.5 miles an hour. Okay? With the new rail, they'll be able to do 25 to 35 miles an hour. Okay? But that will mean they'll have to put back in the gates at Route 20, at Route 62, and put in gates on all the other crossings. So that's going to take a while. That's why they're still restricted. Right now they can do, I have friends who are dispatchers for CSX, all right? And they're allowed to now run at 12 miles an hour, all right? It doesn't sound like much, but you can only do 7.5. 12 miles an hour is a huge difference.
Because of the upgrade,
Because of this upgrade.
the tracks by 40K are really bad, it's amazing.
They've actually been in there working some of that.
Yeah, they're really.
So the discussion up front here is about the tracks and the speeds that trains can run at. So that's what that's some of the questions and some of the answers that we've been deliberating. So some people in the back of the room may not have heard all of that. So anybody else have a question or comment? I see some, how about in the back there? No, in back of Lucy.
When CSX had a derailment off of Allen Road this past summer, I walked the tracks from the old restaurant, and I ran into a CSX inspector and got chatting with him about what happened. And maybe it's sour grapes because he works for CSX, but he said he had put in a request for 80,000 railroad ties through Berlin to Leominster, and CSX allotted him 11,000. So you're talking big business, they're crunching numbers. He also told me that they, as far as he knows, they were not going to the heaviest duty rail available. They were staying kind of midstream. So I think there's a lot in the air when it comes to the railroads, and you get a company of CSX's size and their apparent monopoly. I mean, they had a number of disasters last year, and I'm sure that caused them to look at the bottom line and do some tweaking. So I think we should be aware that that goes on even at that level.
Okay. Any other comments?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned the button factory in Northborough,
Yes.
and they made the buttons out of bones. There's a building that was down the street from where I live in Northborough, on Howard Street. We used to call it Slaughterhouse. I was going to ask a general question if anybody knew anything about slaughterhouses in the city.
No, but bones for the buttons were shipped from various places on this railroad to be brought to Northborough, and they were in bags of 50, 100-pound bags of bones. We saw one order for like 100 bags That's 5,000 pounds of bones, but they were making buttons. And they made a lot of buttons, so, but there was probably a beef, they probably had a slaughterhouses in the areas, and at least slaughtered the animals and ship them in quarters. And those quarters would then be taken to Boston, and you'd see, butchers carrying the quarters and then cutting them into steaks locally. So they wouldn't be cutting steaks here, but they would probably be cutting into quarters, and then those quarters would be shipped in ice, probably ice, and quickly to get to Boston, and then cut into meats, steaks. Any other comments or questions? Lucy?
Would you explain the significance of the horns as the trains are passing through the crossings?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. The letter Q.
The letter Q.
The letter Q.
Yeah.
Go. Where's your horn?
Well,
Get your horn out of the bag.
I left it on the table, I think.
Where's? Oh, there.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Give me that horn there. Will you block?
Here you go. This is important. Why don't you practice?
Does anyone know Morse code? How many know Morse code?
SOS.
They know SOS. How about the letter Q? Okay, blow the letter Q. Whoa, we're not a guess. That's dash. That's the letter Q, and they blow that when they're approaching a crossing.
2 long horns, a quick beep, and then one final long one as they kind of sail through the crossing.
Still do it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I find it interesting though, recently, some of the engineers or firemen, whichever, are taking locals' sleep into account, because at nighttime, I think I hear toot, 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 and it gets a little more toward daylight, it's a toot, toot.
I think it's the engineer.
The engineer.
They have their own,
Some of them, you can tell there's a different engineer because
Each engineer has to control his own hand.
so during the summertime, how many people have air conditioning? If you don't have air conditioning, you usually put the windows up in the summertime and you try to go to sleep. And of course, all over Berlin, you can hear it.
Yeah.
So, and you can hear the train, then you can hear the windows. So it's like, it's part of the culture here to have, it's one, I like it because I grew up near a railroad and I can hear that, but that's part of living in Berlin now.
I live on South Street by Brigham, so I'm a quarter mile from the track.
Uh-oh.
When that train goes through, I whistle, but I can watch the water in my class shake, particularly if there's 2 or 3 inches.
There you go. Yep. I got another comment back there.
Yeah, no,
No, back there.
You know when the last coal fuel engine came through this area?
Coalfield?
So, steam locomotive? I know that on the Central Mass, it was May of 1956. And it was often thought that that was the very last steam engine on the Boston and Maine. Subsequently, somebody discovered that over in Marblehead, they pulled an old steamer out for some reason in July, and that turned out to be the very last steam run on the whole Boston and Maine. But for many years, it was thought that the last run to Clinton on the old viaduct in 1956 was the last engine run on number 1455. And that engine was preserved down in Edaville for many years. Then it ran around different places, took it up, and it finally now is in Danbury, Connecticut, at what's called the New England Rail Museum. It's number 1455. It's identical to the one we showed you at the very start. That was number 1498. So it was a whole series known as moguls. That was the type of engine, a fairly small engine for local service.
Was it a steam engine or a diesel engine that Henry Wheeler stopped because it was shooting sparks and causing fires alongside the tracks?
I don't know.
Apparently he cut it off at a crossing or something, that put out the fire or don't go any further.
I didn't know Henry ever pulled anybody over.
Any other comments or questions? This has been great.
So
You got one more?
The
Okay.
last steam engine to go on the Boston and Maine was in 1976, the bicentennial. I lived in Duck Harbor in Clinton,
Okay,
and it went by. We were sitting in the house listening to it, and all of a sudden the field. And so we all ran down the hill to see the train go by, and waved to the conductor, the engineer.
the historians argue about what's known as a revenue run. So the last revenue run, meaning kind of officially on the books as part of the company operation, was in fact that Marblehead run that beat out Clinton, that Clinton's honors is supposed to be the last. There have been a number of things, like you say, the bicentennial engine was one, and in Wayland, in 1973, a very wealthy man got a steam locomotive and about 3 passenger cars out of what was called Steamtown in Bellows Falls. There's a new Steamtown in Scranton, Pennsylvania, but it was up in Bellows Falls, Vermont, and he hired that steam engine for his wedding party to come to the Wayside Inn. And so they got it out of Vermont. It found its way through the track system onto the Central Mass. And people say they couldn't believe hearing a steam engine in 1973, but it was permitted, and they stopped somewhere out in the middle of nowhere in Wayland, and they got some buses, and they went down, and they took the wedding party to the Wayside Inn for the big reception.
All right, we're getting close to the bewitching hour. We got one, yeah?
Just one question. I heard someone here describe the Clinton viaduct by the dam as rickety. How did it get that descriptor? Were there structural problems known or before it was torn down?
Well, it was finished roughly in about 1903. Okay, so the switch, if you will, that would have gone through the middle of the reservoir, which is now filling up. It's 1903 on the calendar, right? They had to have a switch over here at Bonds Hill Road. And so at midnight in July of 1903, they had to throw the switch to stop the trains from going into the reservoir valley and get them up through the tunnel and to the new viaduct. But there it is, you know, it's built in 1903. It's getting supposedly kind of rickety, I guess, around the late 1950s. The last bug car, the silver propelled cars, went through Berlin in May of '58. And they claimed that was the last train, supposedly, over that viaduct. I met a man one time who has a kid, said he got a ride in the cab with the engineer. And he said when they came out of the tunnel, he said the viaduct was making more noise than the steam engine, creaking back and forth. So it was abandoned then, roughly again, in 1958. The tracks were taken out down here at West Berlin. And it sat there. And in 1975, a gentleman named Mickey Fuller, who I think was based in Bolton at the time, I know he eventually ended up in Bolton, he had the job to take it down. And he apparently did it for the scrap value. I found on the YouTube once, and gosh, I can't seem to find it again. There were 2 like 10-second videos of them cutting the steel and watching the beams splash down into the river. Maybe somebody can find that one again, but those are the only 2. And then somebody took it, obviously, with a little 8mm camera in 1975 of the viaduct being cut up into pieces. So the footings are still there, but the steel has all been recovered. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're gonna break. Let's see too many more hands.
Thank you, gentlemen.
You're welcome.